I don't believe this.
I know, grandson. A woman in the military.
This is the greatest game of all time.
2024, Fearless, the Year of Shadow, has officially ended 3 months ago, in what was probably the most exciting and eventful year for Sonic fans in quite some time. There were special little events and small collaborations to celebrate Shadow, but the real entree came with Sonic Shadow Generations, a remaster of the original 2011 title with an additional campaign featuring the Ultimate Life Form, and of course the Sonic 3 movie, which was pretty successful commercially, grossing almost $500 million on a $120 million budget. It's not too bad. A fourth movie's already been greenlit that, spoilers for the Sonic 3 movie for the rest of the video, will feature Metal Sonic and Amy, implying that it'll be some kind of adaptation of Sonic CD, the way this movie was for Adventure 2. And critically, it did alright for itself. It was the highest rated of all 3 movies. Even though there were still some middling and negative reviews, it was a definite improvement over the first 2, but there's still room for growth. Well, that's what the critics would say. If you ask Sonic fans, they loved this shit. Before we get into my review of the third Sonic movie, let's do a little housekeeping with...
Hello, your name's Shadow, isn't it?
Actually, this is my first time ever playing Sonic Generations alongside Shadow Gens. I never got around to it until now, and you don't need me to tell you that Sonic Generations is great. It's one of the best 3D Sonic games, the remix soundtrack is excellent, and the levels are all super replayable and addicting. You've heard this before, you know this already. But what I will tell you is how surprised I was to find how different Shadow Gens is compared to Sonic Gens. Shadow is running off of the improved Hedgehog engine that was originally featured in Sonic Gens, and aside from obvious improvements to performance and resolution, there's much more cinematic flair and detail to Shadow's levels that bring them to life, especially compared to some of Sonic's levels. The style and gameplay may look similar at a first glance, 3D platforming levels with some 2D sections that focus on Shadow revisiting games and moments from his past as he confronts the return of Black Doom and the sudden reappearance of Gerald Robotnik and Maria in a similar white space void that Sonic found himself in. But Shadow Gens feels a lot different the further you get into it. Shadow has a double jump, his ground control speed feels tighter and more responsive. Actually, he controls identically to how Sonic did in Sonic Frontiers. That's not to mention Shadow's level design, which focuses more on fast reflexes for very controlled, linear platforming. Shadow's levels felt more focused and tightly designed, but they had less room for experimentation and branching pathways compared to Sonic Generations. I found myself making mistakes and dying a lot less in Shadow compared to Sonic Gens, which felt like the branching pathways and focus on momentum and keeping a good flow led to more room for error. Shadow Gens was more forgiving in this regard. Playing through Shadow gave me ideas about how Sega could capitalize off of a Sonic game in the future that could feature mostly 3D gameplay, without a need to resort to utilizing classic Sonic, but still featuring 2 completely different gameplay styles. It's actually strange now that I think about it. Given Shadow's popularity as a character, there's never been a Sonic game that featured only Sonic and Shadow as the main protagonists and focus on the narrative. The closest thing we've gotten to this is Sonic 06. I'd be very interested in a future mainline Sonic game that focused on the 2 of them, with Sonic's levels focusing more on heavy momentum and branching paths, all about maintaining a good rhythm and speed. Whereas Shadow's levels can feature tighter platforming, combat, and levels based on reaction, using his different abilities like the Doom Wings and Chaos Spears to complete levels quickly. The gameplay of Shadow Gens, just like Sonic, is far and away the biggest highlight that carries the mostly lacking narrative. While I love all the elements that are here, the return of Black Doom, the reunion between Shadow and Maria, there's just not enough. What is here is enjoyable and feels appropriately written for the characters, but we barely get any scenes to develop it further. Sonic Frontiers has a great approach that could have been used appropriately here, where Shadow could regularly visit with Maria, Gerald, and some more characters in the Void that have a connection with his history, like Rouge, Omega, the Commander. Instead, if I remember correctly, we get one scene with Shadow reuniting with Maria, and then by the very next main cutscene, we're already saying our goodbyes. It feels like we're missing an entire story here. If Shadow Gens had a limited budget with a small amount of dead time, no more is that apparent than with a narrative. I also love the music, the return to metal that just feels so right with Shadow's personality. There's great callbacks here, like the White Void having little melodies that are shared with All Hail Shadow. But then there's some minor gripes I have, like the remix of Supporting Me, which is incredible, but doesn't have any vocals or any kind of instrumentation to replace the vocals. It's just not there. It very much feels like it's missing something, which is a shame, because the remixed boss fight and many of the other boss fights are incredible and highlight clever uses for Shadow's new powers outside of platforming. As I said before, what is here is great. The greatest compliment I could give to Shadow Gens is I wish there was more of it. Aside from the limited narrative, the only major flaw is the complete oversight in any levels from Shadow the Hedgehog 2005. I noticed during my first playthrough of Sonic Gens that there were 4 completely separate levels with city themes, and I'm speculating here, but I imagine the devs did that in order to save on resources. If this is true, then it feels strange that they couldn't at least fit in one more city setting and feature Westopolis. It feels like an obvious inclusion, given that they chose to feature 2 other city-themed levels with Radical Highway and Sunset Heights. While granted I would have preferred many other level themes from Shadow the Hedgehog, I would have happily taken at least Westopolis. But overall, this remaster is an easy recommendation for any Sonic fan. But moving on from Sonic Shadow Generations, just a few months later, we get... I feel it necessary to make this disclaimer before you hear anything I have to say on the Sonic movies, and if you've seen my previous video on Sonic, you've already heard this before, but I'm a casual Sonic fan. Nowhere near a diehard, but I've played a healthy amount of the mainline games and a couple of spin-offs. I'd say I'm comfortable with the franchise. Up until this point, I'd never seen any of the films. I never really wanted to. The general impression I'd gotten from critics and many fans is that they were decent but nothing special, with some especially bad subplots involving a wedding. But I saw that Sonic 3 was adapting Sonic Adventure 2, my favorite title in the franchise, featuring peak fiction character Shadow, and the first trailers looked pretty great, so screw it, why not? Well, in order to prepare, I watched the first Sonic movie right before Sonic 3. Well, only the first half, because that was all the time I had. I started watching it about an hour before I went to go see Sonic 3. But I'll tell you right now, I went back to finish the trilogy after watching Sonic 3, and my biggest criticisms with Sonic 3 are unique to this film alone. Watching the rest of the movies didn't change my opinion of Sonic 3 all that much, and nothing I say will diminish that the films are not only successful for Sega, but beloved by so many fans. Any criticism I mention about this film will never take away what it means to you. We can like and dislike different things, and life goes on. But bear with me, because even if you think these films are genuine, flawless masterpieces, at the very least, I hope you find my perspective interesting. And no matter what I think, the films are successful, and we were all there when Sonic wasn't successful, and suffice to say, things are a lot better for him now than they were 10, 15 years ago. So, what did I think? I think the Sonic films can best be described as baby's first Marvel movie. I don't use that phrase as an insult, and it's not to say that the Sonic movies are only for children, but they are very obviously geared towards a younger demographic. And generally speaking, I'd say the action and comedy of the Sonic movies is trying to emulate Marvel, but it is a noticeable step down. I mean, they make a reference to Captain America in movie 2. Knuckles himself very much feels like the writers watched Guardians of the Galaxy the day before and just rewrote Drax to fit into the trilogy. The inspiration from Marvel feels very clear to me. The biggest highlight, and arguably the element that makes the Sonic film stand out the most, is Jim Carrey as Dr. Robotnik, an actual third eye foresight level casting. He plays this role with so much enthusiasm and energy, and is able to sell some of the most ridiculous lines. The energy he puts into playing the good doctor is so infectious and palpable that it's almost impossible to not crack a little smile at any scene he's in. What would be unwatchably cringe for one actor somehow works with Jim Carrey. He's at his very best in the third film, and if anyone is referring to their favorite joke in the film, you can likely bet that it was delivered by Carrey. He also has a lot of fun playing the 2 different roles of Ivo and Gerald Robotnik. Speaking of Gerald, my other favorite element of the film is that all of the aspects that are taken directly from Sonic Adventure 2, or heavily inspired from it, like Gerald, Shadow, Maria, and Gerald's plot for vengeance, all of these work great. Shadow's characterization feels right on point. His relationship with Maria is very cute. I would have liked to have seen it pushed a bit further on Maria's behalf. I feel like by the end of the film, we still don't know enough about her personality and beliefs. She still sometimes comes across as a plot device rather than her own character with her own defined goals. I think an extra scene or 2 with her could have really punched things up a bit, maybe featuring a flashback with Gerald. The movie's pacing is incredibly fast. Starting with Shadow's escape from Prison Island and moving on to Team Sonic's confrontation with him, the movie wastes almost no time to kickstart the plot, which was a pleasant surprise. There was almost never a moment where I was bored or waiting for a scene to end, and there wasn't a single subplot or side story that took away from the film, like the horrible padding from Sonic 2 that tanked that film's pacing. I'd go so far as to say that nearly every scene progressed the plot, in a meaningful and interesting way, which sounds kind of silly to say out loud, but compared to the first two movies, this is a giant improvement. But the fast pacing did create issues that I'll address later. A lot of times, the action could be pretty fun and inventive. I do think the two obvious highlights are the initial chase scene with Shadow on the bike and the superpowered Dragon Ball fight that kickstarts the third act. There's a nice bit of character interaction that does a lot of heavy lifting for the script, injecting some much needed personality. One particular highlight that I can think of is small, but involves Agent Stone and Tails when they're separated from the rest of the group. And coupled with the charming Lee Majdoub and Colleen O'Shaughnessy, who voices Tails in the mainline series and is the only voice actor from the games to have a role in the films, it's a great little bit between them. There's some musical melodies in the film that are a nice touch, like Maria playing the melody to Live and Learn on the guitar at the beginning of the film, or Dr. Eggman's theme song from Sonic 06, or the ending of the film featuring the last scene from Adventure 2. I really love that they found a way to incorporate such an emotional and important song in this film. Overall, the positives of the film revolve around anything that was taken from Sonic Adventure 2, and the action scenes. And that's not to say that the only good elements from the film are whatever was adapted from the original game. Agent Stone has been a consistent highlight in the trilogy, but Shadow's story revolving around Maria and Gerald are far and away the most engaging element of this film's story. Whether it's a coincidence, or my Sonic fan bias, or indicative of the film's writers, I couldn't tell you. Before I go into my negative opinions, I do want to reiterate that I did like this film. I think it's good, and easily the best of the three. And most of my criticisms are focused on the writing, pacing, and the third act. It's not to say that the first two acts are flawless, but this is just what sticks out to me for most of the film. I highly encourage you to share your thoughts on what you disagree with me on the film, or if I'm not giving enough credit where it's due, please let me know. I know people adore this film, and I'd love to hear more about why and see what I'm missing out on. Because I think the film's biggest failings is squared on the comedy half of being an action comedy. Some of the film's humor is frankly dog. And the biggest culprit regarding the film's script revolves around our beloved Blue Blur. I don't know if it's because he's the main character, so a bulk of the humor has to fall on his shoulders, or that Sonic is portrayed as the very sarcastic, cocky leader of the team. I don't know what it is, but man, Sonic is painfully unfunny and something he's almost never felt like to me in any game he's been in. He's just unlikable here. Almost all of the film's attempts at humor fall flat on his behalf, and the constant jokes and quips just weigh his character down. And it's crazy that this film can depict Ben Schwartz as unlikable or unfunny. Sonic reads as so insufferable in this film, and it's even weirder if you watch the previous films. His personality in those is fine? It's not amazing, but as the films go on, the writers try and depict Sonic as more capable and confident, but they confuse it with cocky and obnoxious. It's such a strange oversight. Sonic's most defining traits to me, more than anything, more than being capable or humorous or friendly, is that he's likable and admirable. And I think Sonic from all three films, but especially the third film, kind of fails in this regard. And no amount of strengths in the film will change that most of my favorite scenes in this film didn't feature the main character at all. The biggest kind of emotional depth or character he shows is towards the end when he's hurt about Tom's near-death experience, but at that point, it's too little too late, and it doesn't have any kind of lasting impact on Sonic's character. I will say that I really like this scene for how it highlights Knuckles' maturity. When he elects to take the high road and let Sonic make his own choice, rather than fight him for possession of the Chaos Emeralds. It feels like real, meaningful growth from Knuckles, compared to his appearance in the second movie. But for Sonic, we don't get any kind of sign that he's properly matured from the experience, or he has any kind of new outlook on how he judges others or what he thinks of himself. His behavior and personality by the end of the film really doesn't feel that different compared to how he was at the beginning. Suffice to say, I don't really like much of anything about this depiction of Sonic, except that Ben Schwartz is very cool, and ever since he was first cast, I had always figured he'd make a great choice to play the character, and I still stand by that. The film's fast pacing is enjoyable at first, but as it progresses, you quickly start realizing that it feels like 10 to 20 minutes of this film did not make the final cut when it really needed it. In fact, I think this film was especially rough before the final cut, and I feel like we were incredibly close to getting an entirely different film, but I'm just speculating at this point. Kristen Ritter, who's incredibly talented by the way, is introduced as a gun officer. I don't remember her name. Her character really isn't all that important, but she's set up as a kind of mysterious figure. Commander Olive Garden tells Team Sonic not to trust Gun when he hands them the MacGuffin after being
Konnichiwa?
Ritter turns against Team Sonic because they're withholding the MacGuffin that she needs. She's depicted as some kind of antagonistic figure for the first half of the movie because she needs the MacGuffin from the team that they were explicitly told not to trust her with, and then nothing. Maybe my understanding of the events is wrong, but after the first act, Team Sonic has to break into Gun in order to get the other key card to prevent the launch of the Eclipse Cannon. But we're never really told why it would be bad for Gun to have both cards, even though it's implied that Team Sonic isn't just trying to take the other key card before the Robotniks do, but they're trying to get both of them to prevent Gun from having it too, and it just feels unexplained. I mean, we as the audience can guess that Gun is untrustworthy given how their actions led to the death of Maria, and maybe that's why the commander warned the team. But these all feel more like different plot elements that should have been more strongly connected, but never were. And Maria died 50 years ago. Why would the commander suggest that Sonic not trust them now, as opposed to the previous two films? Did he only just recently learn about Maria's death? That means that it probably has to revolve around Ritter, right? But again, we don't really learn anything at all about her character. I have to imagine that Kristen Ritter had more scenes that were cut from the film to save time and shave down the pacing, but it results in her character being wholly disposable. I also expected some kind of stronger connection between Gun's murder of Maria, the cover-up of the truth, and arresting Gerald Robotnik, but the movie fails to create this compelling connection between Gun being untrustworthy and how their mistakes would eventually lead to Gerald's downfall and turn to evil. I mean, it's there, but it just feels like there could have been a much more compelling story about not trusting the military and government and acting in your own self-interest based on what you think is right. That's what Sonic the Hedgehog is all about. And the choppiness of the Gun subplot is just one example, but all throughout the movie you can definitely feel the editing struggling to keep it all together. There's quite a few moments where there's just minor inconsistencies between scenes. Characters aren't standing exactly where you expect them to be. Sometimes the camera cuts to a different angle or a shot that feels weird. It's small, but it does start adding up. I think some extra time in the editing room could have helped the movie flow better and fleshed out some of those disappointing or lackluster character moments, and I feel that especially in the film's third act. Although, maybe this edit was as good as it possibly could have been, and instead, a better revision of the script and better pre-production is what the movie needed instead. But on to the third act, which does feature the best moment of the film, with the Dragon Ball fight between Supersonic and Shadow. It's great and easily the highlight of the film's third act. And there are ideas here that I really like the crux of the finale coming down to a confrontation between Ivo and Gerald. It's an opportunity for Eggman to come face to face with a more cruel and disturbed reflection of himself, an idea that was never able to be explored by the original source material since Gerald was long dead. It pairs great too with Sonic confronting Shadow at the same time. On paper, I love this idea, but in execution, it doesn't really live up to this potential. And as far as the rest of the third act goes, I love Sonic Adventure 2. I think it's the best Sonic game. I love the simple but effective narrative and characters, and one of my favorite elements of Adventure 2 is the final act. Once you've completed the hero and dark story and you unlock the last story, from beginning to end, I love everything about the last story. The buildup of Gerald's final confession before death by firing squad, undermining Eggman's plan with his desire for vengeance, seeking to destroy the human race for ruining his life, his research, and taking away his beloved Maria. One final act of pure hatred from a ghost that's been dead for years. Everyone, including Eggman himself, then banding together to reach the core and stop the cannon before it's too late. Shadow realizing his promise to Maria thanks to Amy's plea, all the way to the discovery of the prototype of the ultimate life form, the monstrous Biolizard, and then it using the power of Chaos Control to merge with the cannon and continue the Ark's collision course, requiring Sonic and Shadow to use the power of the Chaos Emeralds to put a stop to it and save the planet, and holy fuck, I love this final act. It's dire. I still get chills when Gerald's message is played for the team, and it's not nostalgia. It's a sudden final act twist that feels earned and appropriate. It's such a stark flip from the high-flying adventure that the game starts off as, and then boom, omnicide at the hands of a hateful scientist that was f***ing executed by firing squad. It's crazy, and I love it. I love everything about it, and I think Sonic 3 tried to realize these ideas, but it falls short in too many regards to have the same weight. After the super fight between Sonic and Shadow, the rest of the third act falls apart. Sonic and Shadow can breathe in space, but Sonic can't swim or breathe underwater. I don't care how you try to explain it, that doesn't make any sense. And no, you can't use logic in the video games to explain this away. Video game logic does not fix inconsistency. The elements of Adventure 2's ending work so well because of all the pieces that are in place. And if an element is going to be removed, whether it be a character or plot device, it has to be in service of a more interesting story. And the ending of Sonic 3 removes too much without adding enough back in to develop its own identity. After Shadow and Sonic reconcile and decide to team up in order to save the world, Live and Learn begins to kick in, and I was pretty excited because if there's one thing I know about the Sonic film franchise, even diehard fans of the films regularly mention how disappointing the soundtracks were, composed by Tom Holkenberg or Junkie XL. They lacked almost any kind of musical melodies or references taken from the games, and don't have a strong personality on their own. This contrast was even more apparent when compared to the Mario movie, composed by Brian Tyler, which, despite having a soundtrack that was ruined by either terrible direction or horrible upper management that thought to litter it with licensed music, also did have a wonderful score that was clearly composed by someone who loved working with the wealth of Nintendo's original brilliant music. So, flash forward to today, leading up to the release of Sonic 3 having multiple hints and confirmations from different sources that Live and Learn, the iconic and amazing theme of Sonic Adventure 2, would be featured in the third film. And as a fan of SA2, Live and Learn isn't just the main theme, it is the theme. It's featured so prevalently in the games, from the intro to the main music to the melody being repurposed for the character introductions that play whenever you resume the story.
Time for games. I have to get out of here.
It's even featured briefly in Shadow the Hedgehog, in a sweet mashup with Shadow's theme song. It's one of the greatest songs to ever be associated with the franchise. It's used as the closer for the Sonic Symphony. I can't even think of modern 3D Sonic without Crush 40 and Live and Learn. So hearing that the Sonic 3 movie would actually feature the song was such an exciting idea. And at the end of the day, these are just movies. If I don't like it, I can just move on. But being able to imagine this moment that features this iconic song that I have such a strong emotional attachment to being played in a feature-length movie, that's just a cool prospect. All objectivity for me gets thrown out the window. So what happened? Live and Learn's role in the third act is disappointing. It doesn't feel like an actual momentous or interesting use of the song, but the filmmakers just jingling keys in front of Sonic fans to trick them into thinking that the third act is more interesting than it actually is. Once the song kicks in, we hard cut to this. Okay, undermining this fun and exciting climax of the film with a joke of Jim Carrey literally slapping his own ass doesn't work for me. This would be the equivalent of the portal scene from Avengers Endgame featuring a fart joke right after Captain America says, "Assemble." If this works for others, great. But it feels like the movie can't let itself be too focused on the action without injecting comedy, whether it's appropriate or not. So after some Jim Carrey slapstick fighting, we cut back to Sonic and Shadow, where Live and Learn is just now starting to kick in again, like experiencing a false start and having to rewind itself. And just as it's starting to kick in while Sonic and Shadow fight very generic space robots that come out of nowhere, we get a cute little reference to the intro of Sonic Adventure 2 battle, and then another cut, and that's it. With the way the final act is put together, we don't get enough time to soak in the fun and excitement of super-powered Sonic and Shadow action before it ends, featuring this iconic song that is so instrumental to the identity of Sonic Adventure 2. Instead, Live and Learn, with what should feel like the most exciting point of the film, ends before it even gets a chance to really start. And it reminds me of another very musically inspired movie that feels like it was made by someone that clearly loves music, and specifically the music chosen for the film. Edgar Wright's Baby Driver is awesome. A really fun action comedy that tells a great story where music is not just baked into the storytelling, but is in the very DNA of the film. The film lets us, as the audience, soak in these incredible musical sequences that range from heists and car chases to romantic dates at the laundromat. Baby Driver, as just one example off the top of my head, is clearly not afraid to let us, as the audience, be absorbed into the world and story through the power of music, which is just as instrumental to the main character as it is to the rest of the film. So why is Sonic the Hedgehog 3 so afraid to do the very same, adapting a franchise that is legendarily known for decades of masterful music? Well, the film isn't afraid, actually. At least I don't think that's the case. It just doesn't care to do that unless it's what the director wants. And what does the director want? And don't get me wrong, this scene with the Robotniks doing a completely silly choreographed dance to Galvanize, this is a great scene. Probably one of the funniest and most enjoyable scenes in the film. It just works so well to show off how Jim Carrey was perfect casting. But why is the film putting in more effort and passion into the silly joke scene where Jim Carrey dances with himself instead of the climax of the film? And man, I haven't even talked about the fucking Biolizard yet. As I've said before, I love everything about the final act of Adventure 2. The build-up, the stakes, everyone's involvement, everything. Especially Eggman's role, who at this point in the series had almost never been depicted of doing anything selfless or heroic until now. I love everything about it, especially the climax, which features Shadow and Sonic confronting the prototype of the ultimate life form, the Biolizard, a monstrous, horrible experiment created by Gerald Robotnik, acting as a perfect analogy for the vengeance and madness of the Doctor, as well as a foil for Shadow, possessing similar power to him, but with none of the humanity that makes Shadow the true ultimate life form. Now, going into this movie, I knew they would never adapt the Biolizard. It's such a crazy finale for the original game, and ending this film on Sonic and Shadow teaming up to face a mutant abomination that tries to destroy the world, it's a crazy fun idea, but I know that Hollywood films, especially ones that are marketed towards mainstream audiences and children, will typically avoid ideas like this in hopes of not alienating the audience. It's the same reason why Shadow's backstory, regarding his creation at the hands of a black space alien that's dripped out in a warlock's robe and jewelry, yeah, this was never gonna happen. And that's fine. I have no problem with taking out the weirder elements of Sonic's history to make it more approachable, or changing whatever elements are necessary, so long as it's in service of a better story. I'm not at all someone who believes that adaptations need to be accurate to the source material to be good. Change is necessary, and we've seen time and time again that great adaptations can change a lot of big and important things about the source material and still function on their own merit. But what I do have an issue with is the Biolizard's role in the finale of Sonic Adventure 2. It acted as a way to drive the stakes up even further and to cement the storyline regarding the ultimate life form. I've always liked the narrative implications regarding Shadow's history and character development, but taking out all of my Sonic fanboying and looking at it from a more objective manner, the Biolizard acted as the perfect obstacle for Sonic and Shadow to team up against and end the game on an exciting note. I mean, the final boss can be completed in less than 2 minutes. It's not difficult. But man, when that intro guitar riff kicks in and the final hazard text crawls out, I get goosebumps just talking about it. So if you're gonna remove the Biolizard, no problem. I think you can deliver the same narrative and stakes without it. But with any adaptation, if you're gonna remove something that's considered memorable, enjoyable, or important to the story, I think it's crucial that the removed element be replaced appropriately. The Last of Us, for example, removes the fun dynamic between Ellie and Bill and their contrasting worldviews and personality, but instead it replaces it with a meaningful and personal story for Bill that works just as well, if not better, in showing us the world of The Last of Us, and that the strength in the story doesn't come from zombie survival or warring humans, but the deep relationships and conflicts formed from flawed individuals. So, with all that being said, what does Sonic the Hedgehog 3 replace the Biolizard with?
Nothing! It's just gone! It's not even there anymore! It's nothing!
Instead of this climactic and exciting finale against this inhuman, horrible manifestation of Gerald Robotnik's vengeance and insanity, we get robots. Generic robots that Shadow and Sonic wipe clean in less than 30 seconds. And that's it. And also the last time we're going to hear Live and Learn featured in this film, because we're right back to Jim Carrey having a science-insect duel with himself. I was left incredibly underwhelmed as I was in the theater watching this play out, and the feeling's just worse now, months after watching the film. This isn't just lame, it's devoid of any real tension or excitement, and doesn't drive up the stakes meaningfully. These robots could have been cut out of the film, and you would lose basically nothing from this final act. They weren't some grand obstacle to overcome, they were almost literal cannon fodder. Any kind of story or thematic element regarding Sonic and Shadow's relationship and the history of the ultimate life form is kind of forgotten. Instead, just like a lot of this film trilogy, for better and worse, the true climax of the film revolves around Eggman overcoming Gerald with a little help from Tails and Knuckles, killing him in a very anticlimactic, albeit hilarious. Shadow and Sonic push the Ark out of the way, Eggman sacrifices himself, Shadow dies, except he doesn't, and Sonic is saved. The day is saved. The end. And man, I don't know if I emphasized enough how fast this film's pacing is, but we go from saving the day to literal credits rolling in what feels like less than a minute. It's just too fast. Or maybe I'm too slow. And I want to emphasize that much of the film's climax doesn't really work for me because of how lackluster it feels. It's hard for me to separate that connection to the original game. But even on its own merits, using what's been established earlier in this film, this ending is just kind of boring. And look, Sonic Adventures 2 ending of the whole gang having a moment to reflect on the journey, and Sonic and Rouge specifically talking about Shadow being a brave and loyal hedgehog. This is all very cheesy, but goddammit, I love it. It feels so sincere, and it's such a lovely way to end the story, with everyone reflecting on what they accomplished and how they couldn't have done it without each other. Even Eggman reflects on how he used to look up to his grandfather, and how he was his hero, and the music is so sad and emotional. And I'm not mentioning this ending as an example for what Sonic 3 should have done, but instead to highlight what works with Adventure 2's approach. Sonic 3 could have had a completely different ending that reached a similar emotional weight of Adventure 2, but instead, it just ends. With no interesting reflection or moment to let the tragic ending breathe a little. The film's score features a little reference to the ending song featured in Adventure 2, which is nice, but also there's something extra insulting about the film's original score having constant references to Sonic Adventure 2 with the names of every song, yet most of them are incredibly forgettable. In some cases, like the ending song's Sayonara, Shadow the Hedgehog, it's great, but in other examples, like Throw It All Away, these are cute little Easter eggs at best for anyone who decides to read the title of the soundtrack, but it's strange to use a song in the soundtrack titled Sayonara, Shadow the Hedgehog, yet there's no moment in the film that reflects on Shadow, or Eggman's redemption and working with the team to save the world, or any kind of examination on humanity and how a traumatic event featuring the death of an innocent child can drive an honest man to the point of cruelty where he wants to destroy the world. Nah. We get one brief little dialogue with Sonic making up with Knuckles and Tails, and then we get s'mores, and then credits roll. And man, does that credits music just hit me like whiplash.
Days like this don't get much better.
What the fuck is this?
The final act, even removing all nostalgic attachment to Sonic Adventure 2, is missing grander stakes and emotional resonance that I think even regular moviegoers would notice. It's very much like what I mentioned before regarding Kristen Ritter's character. The breakneck pacing and choppy editing, what we gain in slapstick fighting with 2 Jim Carreys, we lose an ending that feels appropriate for the character arcs of Sonic, Shadow, and Eggman. Originally, before the film came out, I had a fun theory that the film would pull a Godzilla vs. Kong and the true villain would be Metal Sonic, created by Gerald Robotnik as a prototype for the ultimate life form that would later be perfected with Shadow. Sonic and Shadow would have to team up to defeat Metal Sonic, maybe they would turn into their super forms and we would get some kind of variant of Metal Madness built from the framework of the Eclipse canon to crash into Earth? I don't know, it could have been a clever way of taking both the Biolizard and Metal Sonic and combining both ideas into one villain. A giant evil robot wouldn't have been as outlandish as a mutant lizard. It would have had some connection to actual moments and characters from the franchise's history, and it would have tied the themes of the story together regarding the ultimate life form, humanity, and how strength can't be created in a lab by an evil scientist seeking revenge, but instead comes from forming connections and friends. Metal Sonic could have represented the perfect lifeless foil to Sonic and Shadow. Given some of the released concept art for the film, Metal Sonic was almost featured in this film, so this idea is not as outlandish as it may sound. And given the film's after credit scene, this fanfiction I've thought of could still be adapted in the 4th Sonic movie, but instead what we're left with this movie is nothing. And I don't mean to sound overtly negative, but really, if you're at all familiar with the story of Sonic Adventure 2, then there's no plot twist or interesting surprise from the movie. The second I saw Gerald and Shadow in the first trailer, I had an idea for how the story would play out, and the film didn't include anything in the final act to try and subvert my expectation or even surprise me. If anything, I was surprised by all the elements that were removed, with the only positive change being the super fight that kickstarts the third act and the idea of Eggman coming face to face with Gerald. Having now seen all 3 films, I see obvious signs of improvement and confidence with the third film, but it still feels like some weight is holding these films down. Whether it's on Jeff Fowler or the writing team, who sometimes seem more interested in creating a full-blown Jim Carrey 90s comedy rather than a focused Sonic film, or some kind of clueless upper management behind the scenes that are too afraid to embrace the colorful and sincere world of Sonic. I don't know what the future looks like going forward. We're getting a loose adaptation of Sonic CD, probably introducing some kind of time travel element, since that's a core part of Sonic CD's setting and identity. And while I am optimistic, I also remember that this trilogy almost began with that original atrocious design for Sonic. While the third film is the best one, and it's not even close. There is still plenty of room for improvement. We're 3 movies in now, and only barely scratching the surface of greatness. If it were any other films, I would have stopped watching after the second movie. I'd be interested in seeing what a different team would be able to accomplish with these characters, though most of my criticism is very much focused on the writing and script. I can say that Jeff Fowler, while not perfect, is improving and can have a pretty keen eye for action and interesting set pieces. He's worked before in the production of the CG cutscenes for Shadow the Hedgehog. He's worked as an animator and artist in film before. I think his talents could really shine if the Sonic films had begun as animated films instead of these live-action hybrids. As comedies, these movies just aren't that funny, and most of the biggest emotional moments don't hit the way I imagine they're supposed to. The third movie has great moments, and I see the vision for what could be, but there's plenty of room for improvement to deliver a story that could be earnest and moving without sacrificing humor and levity. From my understanding, Tyson Hesse, I don't know, who's credited with all 3 films as a lead designer and storyboard supervisor, is doing some incredible stuff behind the scenes to save these films. And I believe he also had a major hand in redesigning Sonic for the films. I don't know much about film production, but I'd be very curious to see him have more creative control over the films, if that's possible. Given what I've heard, it sounds like he's been instrumental in making these films as good as they can be. Overall, Sonic 1 is okay. It's cute, but a bit forgettable. Sonic 2 is bad, which is a shame because it's doing a lot of things that I really like, and Sonic 3 is good. It's almost great, but as an adaptation, it's missing many of the interesting elements from Adventure 2 without forging much of its own identity. I'm not saying we needed Rouge the Bat and all her bat spandex, but the dynamic between Sonic and Shadow could have been explored further. Sonic could have been written as more of a naive but likable hero instead of what feels like Alvin Chipmunk with super speed. And the pacing and editing of the film results in a final act that feels empty of interesting action and emotional weight, barely being redeemed by the Supersonic and Shadow fight and Eggman's sacrifice and final goodbye to Agent Stone. Maybe Sonic the Hedgehog 4, if it continues this trajectory, can prove to be great in a way that lives up to the franchise's namesake. Also, if you add Team Chaotix and Big the Cat, then this becomes a 10 out of 10 franchise. I don't make the rules.